Hey, night owls. Welcome back to Shadow Sleep Stories, where darkness whispers before you sleep. Tonight's story comes from the lonely countryside, where silence hides something far more terrifying. My name is David, and I need to tell someone about what happened to me 3 weeks ago, driving through rural Kansas. I keep telling myself it was just exhaustion, just my mind playing tricks on me after 12 hours on the road. But I know what I saw, I know what I heard, and I know I'll never drive through the countryside at night again. I was heading home to Denver from my sister's wedding in Missouri. It should have been a straightforward drive. 8 hours of interstate highways and familiar truck stops. But construction detours had taken me off the main roads, deep into farmland that seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. The GPS on my phone had lost signal an hour earlier, somewhere around sunset. The last town I'd passed through was barely more than a gas station and a grain elevator, and that was 40 miles behind me. Now there was nothing but cornfields on either side of this narrow county road, and darkness that seemed to swallow my headlights. The fuel gauge was approaching empty. I'd been searching for any sign of civilization, a farmhouse with lights on, a convenience store, anything. But the countryside was eerily quiet, like the world had been abandoned. That's when I saw it. A farmhouse sat about 100 yards off the road, connected by a gravel driveway that disappeared into tall grass. It was the first building I'd seen in over an hour. The house was old, probably built in the 1940s with that classic white clapboard siding and a wraparound porch that spoke of better times. But something about it felt wrong. Every window was dark except one. A single window on the second floor glowed with warm, yellow light. The kind of light you'd expect from an old oil lamp. As I slowed down to get a better look, I could swear I saw a silhouette move past that window. Someone was home. My car coughed as the engine struggled with the last drops of gasoline. I didn't have a choice. I needed help, and this farmhouse was the only sign of life I'd seen for miles. The gravel driveway crunched under my tires as I pulled up to the house. Up close, the building looked even older than I'd thought. The paint was peeling, the porch steps sagged slightly, and weeds grew wild around the foundation. But it was clearly inhabited. There was a newer pickup truck parked near a weathered barn, and I could smell wood smoke coming from the chimney. I knocked on the front door and waited. Footsteps, slow, deliberate footsteps coming down what sounded like wooden stairs. They stopped just on the other side of the door, and I had the strangest feeling that someone was looking at me through the peephole, studying me. "Who's there?" The voice was elderly, male, with the kind of accent you'd expect from someone who'd lived their whole life in rural Kansas. "I'm sorry to bother you so late," I called out. "My car's almost out of gas and I'm lost. I was wondering if you could point me toward the nearest town." The door opened slowly, revealing a man in his 70s. He was tall and thin, wearing overalls and a flannel shirt that had seen better days. His face was weathered like old leather, and his eyes were the palest blue I'd ever seen, almost gray. He looked me up and down, taking in my city clothes and my obvious desperation. "Nearest town's about 15 miles south," he said finally, "but there ain't no gas stations open this time of night. You're welcome to use my phone if you need to call someone." I thanked him and followed him into the house. The inside was like stepping back in time. The furniture looked like it hadn't been changed since the 1950s. Heavy wooden pieces with faded upholstery and doilies on every surface. The walls were covered with family photographs, dozens of them, all in old-fashioned frames. But in the dim light from the oil lamps scattered around the room, the faces in the photos seemed to watch me as I walked past. "Phone's in the kitchen," the old man said, leading me down a narrow hallway. "Name's Earl, by the way, Earl Hutchins. This was my daddy's farm, and his daddy's before that." "I'm David," I replied, trying to shake the feeling that the photographs were following my movements. "Been farming here long?" Earl chuckled, but there was no warmth in the sound. "All my life. This land, it keeps you. Once you're part of it, you don't really leave." The kitchen was just as dated as the rest of the house. An old rotary phone sat on a wooden table next to the window, and I could see my car parked outside in the yard. I tried calling my sister to let her know where I was, but the line was dead. "Phone service goes out sometimes during storms," Earl explained, though I hadn't heard any thunder. You're welcome to stay the night. Got a spare room upstairs. Morning's soon enough to worry about getting to town. I wanted to leave. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get back in my car and try to make it to civilization on fumes. But it was past midnight. I was exhausted, and the old man seemed harmless enough. "That's very kind of you," I said. "I appreciate the hospitality." Earl led me upstairs to a small bedroom that smelled of dust and old wood. The room was simple, a single bed with a patchwork quilt, a wooden dresser, and a window that looked out over the dark fields. An oil lamp on the nightstand provided the only light. "Breakfast is at 6, Earl said from the doorway. "Sleep well?" I waited until I heard his footsteps retreat down the hallway before I tried to settle in. The bed was surprisingly comfortable, but sleep wouldn't come. The house was too quiet, and yet not quiet enough. Every few minutes I'd hear something. A footstep in the hallway, a door closing softly somewhere in the house, the whisper of voices from downstairs. Around 2 in the morning, I heard something that made my blood run cold. Laughter, children's laughter, coming from somewhere outside the house. It was the kind of innocent, joyful laughter you'd hear on a playground. But there were no children here. Earl lived alone, and we were miles from the nearest neighbor. I crept to the window and looked out into the yard. They were playing in the moonlight. 3 children, maybe 8 or 9 years old, running around the yard in some kind of game of tag. They were wearing old-fashioned clothes, the kind you'd see in photographs from the 1940s. A girl in a simple dress and 2 boys in short pants and suspenders. But something was wrong with the way they moved. They were too pale, too translucent. When they ran past the barn, I could see the wooden walls through their bodies. I rubbed my eyes, convinced I was hallucinating from exhaustion. But when I looked again, the children were still there. And now they were looking up at my window, waving at me with those impossible see-through hands. That's when I noticed the photographs on the dresser. In the dim lamplight, I could make out 3 frames I hadn't seen before. 3 children, posed formally for an old family portrait. The same children who were playing in the yard below. I grabbed my jacket and shoes, determined to leave immediately. I didn't care if my car ran out of gas a mile down the road. I had to get out of that house. But as I reached for the bedroom door, I heard Earl's voice from the hallway. "You can't leave yet, David." "They're still playing." I froze with my hand on the doorknob. Earl's voice sounded different now. Younger somehow, like he was decades younger than the old man who'd welcomed me inside. "They don't get visitors very often," the voice continued. "City folk usually drive right past. But you stopped. You saw the house and you came inside. That means you're supposed to be here." I opened the door slowly. Earl was standing in the hallway, but he wasn't the same man I'd met downstairs. His face was younger, his hair darker, and his clothes were the same style as the children outside. Simple farm clothes from the 1940s. "The children have been waiting so long for someone to play with," he said, smiling with teeth that seemed too white in the lamplight. "And I've been waiting so long for someone to help with the farm work." Behind him in the hallway, I could see them now. Dozens of figures, all translucent, all wearing clothes from different decades. Men, women, children, all watching me with hungry eyes. All of them people who had stopped at this farmhouse over the years. People who had needed help or shelter or directions. People who had never left. "The land keeps you," Earl repeated, his voice now echoing strangely in the narrow hallway. "Once you're part of it, you don't really leave. And we've been so lonely, David. So very lonely." I ran. I pushed past Earl and the other figures, stumbling down the stairs and bursting through the front door into the night air. Behind me, I could hear voices calling my name. Dozens of voices, all pleading with me to stay, to join their eternal farm family. My car started on the first try, despite the empty fuel gauge. I drove as fast as I dared down that dark country road, not daring to look in the rearview mirror until I saw the lights of the next town. I made it to a 24-hour truck stop and filled up with gas, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the pump. The night clerk asked if I was okay, and I told him I'd had car trouble. I didn't mention the farmhouse. I didn't mention the children playing in the moonlight or the figures in the hallway. Who would believe me? But I did some research when I got home. I looked up property records for that area. Searched through old newspapers and county archives. What I found made my blood run cold. The Hutchins farm has been abandoned since 1987. Earl Hutchins died that year, along with his wife and 3 grandchildren, in a house fire that destroyed the original farmhouse. The property has been empty ever since. No buildings, no structures of any kind, but travelers still report seeing lights in that area, seeing an old farmhouse that shouldn't exist, and sometimes people disappear on that stretch of county road. Their cars are found abandoned, out of gas, with no sign of the drivers. I think about those missing people sometimes, especially on rainy nights like this. I wonder if they're still there, on that impossible farm, helping Earl with work that never ends and playing with children who never grow old. And I wonder if I ever find myself driving through rural Kansas again, if I see that house in my headlights, will I have the strength to keep driving? Or will the loneliness in those pale blue eyes be too much to resist? The land keeps you, Earl had said. Once you're part of it, you don't really leave. Sweet dreams.